Welcome to the place where we learn about and learn from the leaders in our field who are powering creativity. I'm Aaron Dworkin, and this is Arts Engines. Thanks again for joining me here on Arts Engines. Today's guest is Kevin Haden, who serves as Senior Associate Dean of Strategic Engagement and Institutional Excellence for the Curtis Institute of Music. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. I'm so glad to be here. Thanks.
Well, so I am so excited to talk with you. Obviously, Curtis is one of our great creative partners. And not only that, I've had, long ties, Sphinx's long-term partnerships. I have been very honored to be able to give a commencement address and receive an honorary degree. So we are very, very closely knit with the Curtis Institute of Music, which of course stands at the forefront of our institutions who are preparing young people for their careers in the arts. And so I'm so excited. And at the show, a lot of times when someone has a long title, I love to start by just delving right in and going, you know what? There are people for sure in our audience who want to know, what exactly does a Senior Associate Dean of Strategic Engagement and Institutional Excellence do? So wondering if you could kind of start there with just kind of what's the scope of what falls under this role and what are the goals or mission specifically for this position?
Yeah, well, first of all, kudos to you for getting that mouthful of a title out. Like you say that title probably better than I do at this point. I started with Curtis back in August, so we're about 8 months in for me. So I'm relatively new to the Institute. And the position itself is also brand new. And so, there is a bit of discovery that's kind of coming along, just, as you have with any sort of new position. But really, the idea behind it is to really expand the reach of the provost's office. So Curtis being such a small institution, the provost is much kind of closer, to the students than they would be at like University of Michigan or like a large, university, or even some larger, conservatories, right? And I think Curtis was really interested in finding a way to have like more points of connection between students, faculty in particular, and the provost. And so they made the decision to create both an associate provost position and then also my position. And the way my position actually came to be was, I was actually had applied for another position, and it was through that process that I was like sort of identified as a person like, oh, you possess these qualities for, a position that we had in mind to maybe create down the road. But, it seems like you'd be a fit now. And so day to day, it can be almost anything. So there are some days that I'm, sitting with individual students. Some days I'm working with student council. Other days I'm, working with faculty. I sat in on a middle states accreditation meeting this morning. It's very, very broad. I meet regularly with the provost. I serve as really like a strategic thought partner for him. We're working on a new strategic plan. We're at that point in time in Curtis's history. They just finished a plan, and the report's at their centennial. So a lot of things happening, but I'll say like no 2 days are ever the same. I'm never bored, that's for sure.
Awesome, awesome. And so in this process, are there like kind of overarching goals or outcomes that you're hoping to see, and or the provost, the institution as a whole, relating either to students or partnerships or kind of overall strategic direction, or just kind of any kind of those things that are kind of goalposts as you look at this work?
Yeah, it's interesting. I would say there was a mutual desire to sort of up the collaborative energy and the collaborative nature of how Curtis does what it does, both on the inside and the outside. It was something that made me very interested in coming here in this capacity. I would say like collaboration is sort of a good way to describe my approach to my work, whether it's leadership, whether it's working on teams. And that really seemed to be like the one thing that was clear. I think what's interesting with Curtis has such a long and storied history, but it just turned 100 in October. So like now is like the perfect time, if any, to start thinking about, to reflect, but then start thinking about what's the future, how might it be different. So there's a bit less. I know I think there are a lot of times where organizations know exactly, what it is that they want to be doing or exactly what the vision is for the next steps. And I think probably now is a more open time maybe than it's ever been in the history of this institute, just because of like the point in time that we're in. And so we're all kind of grabbing onto that and then just really focusing on having this collaborative energy about it and trying to create ways so that everybody in the Curtis community has a chance to have a voice in this process of what our future is going to be, as we reflect on it. So really like a lot of my work is just driven at making sure students have a voice and that that voice gets heard. Faculty have a voice, make sure that voice gets heard. Staff to a lesser extent, because there's certain, kind of structures put in place to ensure that that happens already. But, staff, alumni, trustees at some level, just making sure that everybody has the opportunity to really speak up and share their thoughts and be accounted for.
Love that. Absolutely love that. And it's almost like as I look at your hat, I'm like, it's like creating change through collaboration and through
Mm.
the kind of, and it seems like especially student driven, kind of thoughts and initiatives, those types of things as well.
Yeah, yeah,
Awesome.
yeah.
Awesome. Great, great. So also I'm curious too, and I'm sure there are those in our audience, kind of for a role like this, could you kind of share, were there any key aspects of your own background that you feel that you are able to bring to bear? And you're like, you know what, because of this, because I come to the table with this experience and or this background, I feel that empowers me as I address this particular role.
Yeah, well, I'm a former dean to start. I came here directly from University of the Arts, which unfortunately had that very tragic, abrupt closure. And that was personally painful for me. It was painful for so many, not just at UArts, but just in Philadelphia in general. It's just such a part of the city. But I did have, the experience of being there as dean of the School of Music for 2 years. And then prior to that, I had a 24-year career at NYU in the Department of Music and Performing Arts Professions at the Steinhardt School primarily. You see, I'm no stranger to long titles. It's like from the beginning, I went, to New York University, Steinhardt School of Culture, Education, and Human Development. It's like all the words in one. But honestly, I think the root of it really starts there. I that's where I did both my education, my bachelor's and my master's degree. But I also worked there in a number of different administrative positions. I taught there as an adjunct. And so, that NYU is a very large place, very complicated. There's probably about 4 or 5 different areas of the university where you can study music in different ways. I happen to be in the largest department where I'd say the overwhelming majority of the music happens. But it was everything from, performance, composition, both classical and jazz, music business, music technology was there, creative arts therapies, not just music therapy, but drama therapy, educational theater was in that department, dance education was in that department. So, I had a pretty, broad range of experience just in terms of dealing with different arts disciplines, dealing with different profiles of institutions in higher education. You think of NYU, it's enormous, 60,000 students, something in that range, versus at the time when I was at University of the Arts, that was under 1,500 students at the time that I was there. So you're talking about, much smaller, but still had a lot of the same structural elements, that the university had in common. But I'll say that sort of through line, I think having just sort of a broad range of experiences at NYU, and particularly with that music department living in what was essentially like a school of education, it really gives you an understanding of, best practices in terms of how to operate administratively within arts education, environments, music education environments, but then pair that with my experience at UArts, and that was so small and so almost family-like, because of the size of it, because of the sort of individualized attention you could give each student, and that translated, very well, of course, to Curtis, which is even smaller, as you might imagine.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. No, it's fantastic. And from this perspective and all of these experiences, do you feel like that today there's any kind of key changes or trends that you've seen in terms of as we think about preparing young people for a career moving forward? Is there any kind of key thing overall that you're like, you know what, we have to get this right, like, or we need to make sure they have these skill sets, beyond the specific, training in their discipline, et cetera? Is there any kind of key things that you're like, this is a skill set we need to make sure our young people have to ensure they'll be successful moving forward?
I kind of tend to flip that a bit around in my work, where the thing that I find myself kind of encouraging people to do over and over again, be it colleagues or maybe people on my staff, people who report to me, et cetera, is to leave space for the students to show us what they discover, where they see not just themselves going, but maybe where they see the industry going, maybe where they see the world going. I think there's so much talk nowadays, and rightfully so, about like innovation and sort of being forward thinking and what sorts of transformation the music industry might be going through, whether you're talking about the classical music industry and some of the challenges it's having with audiences and developing audiences, keeping audiences, growing audiences, or if you're just talking about the societal innovations, technology innovations that are impacting like the mainstream music industry and all these things. Who better to sort of be thinking about what that future could be than young people, the people who are kind of all inspiration almost at this point. Leaving space, and doing that purposefully. So if you're designing curriculum, making sure you're doing it in a way that, yes, you're providing them that foundation. Yes, you're providing them with certain key skills and competencies that we think they need to know, that we think will be translatable, but then also like offering some space for them to play around and experiment, start to make some decisions or make some choices about who they think they might want to be, try on different, artistic identities, musical identities. And that can be a challenge, right? Because I think as educators, it feels good when we're like, "Hey, young person, here's this thing I just sort of told you or showed you," and like, that exchange always feels so tidy, right? But I think like when we put ourselves in that less comfortable position of saying like, "Hey, where do you want to go?" Knowing that the response could maybe be someplace that maybe we haven't been, directly, but figuring out how we can, facilitate and how we can approach those problems and challenges with students and kind of support them through that form of discovery. Those are the things that I tend to find myself focusing on. Those are the things I find myself like kind of advocating for, even here at Curtis, certainly at UR, it's at NYU. Yeah,
Um,
that's where
I
I'm at.
love it. I love it. It's absolute, and I can see the impact and how the young people are driving the process. So unfortunately, we are just about out of time, but I always like to ask of all of my guests, this work obviously so rewarding, inspiring. I can just see in terms of your responses and reactions to the questions and sharing your work. But there also has to be tough days, and especially administrative things don't go right sometimes, things like that. And just wondering if you can share, are there any mechanisms or anything that you do kind of on those toughest of days or when there's an extraordinary challenge that helps you move through it, especially as an administrative leader?
Yeah, that's a really good question. You know, it, it's always hard to answer without knowing, like what the challenge is, right? But as I think of just kind of general things, listening is like just like an underrated skill. Listening hard, and leaning into your strengths. I think, but also being aware of, where they may or may not align with the challenges you're facing. And then I think the component that goes along with that is not being afraid to ask for help. And that really kind of comes back to the collaboration piece, right? It's about getting more hearts and minds in the room, to attack challenges in different ways. So those are like maybe the three things I would say is like listening, leaning into your strengths, but then also not being afraid to ask for help when you see that those strengths aren't maybe aligned.
Kevin Hayden, you truly are one of the arts engines who is powering human creativity in our world. Thank you so much for everything you do, and thank you for being on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.